Welcome back to the Power and Market Podcast. I'm Ryan McMakin, an editor-in-chief at the Mises Institute. And joining me today are two of our contributing editors. As usual, we've got Tho Bishop and we have Connor O'Keefe. And we've got some great political, financial news to talk about today. I think you're going to think it's fun because it's such a terrible idea that we're going to have a terrible idea coming out of the Trump administration that we're going to have some fun really tearing it to shreds, I think, as much as we can. But first, just wanted to mention an upcoming event we have, right? We're almost at the holiday time, so we don't have any big events coming up during that. But early next year, we've got something coming, right, Tho?
Absolutely. February 21st, we're going to be in Oklahoma City. I don't think I've ever been to Oklahoma City. So we will have a great line. I'm very excited for this one. We're going to be joined by Dr. Keith Smith, a Power and Market podcast listener. Caitlin Long, who is doing incredible things in the crypto orbit, fighting the Fed and various administrations on the regulatory side of that. Real entrepreneur in that regard. Per Byland of Oklahoma City University, or Oklahoma State University, I should say. Timothy Terrell and our own Ryan McMakin. How can you turn that down? Be our first event for 2026. I'll be in February, and a reminder that if you want to see the cutting edge of libertarian and notional economics research, we will be in Auburn for our research conferences come March. You can find more about these events in our ever-growing schedule for 2026 at Mises.org/events. And be prepared. It's going to be year-end. We're going to be doing membership drives, fundraisers. We've got a very nice premium this year, a mini book by Ryan McMakin himself on the history and strategy for liberty. So very excited for that. Expect to see more in your email, in your podcast feeds, seeing it on the website. So get ready for that as we get to the end of 2025.
And if you're not already getting anything from us in your inbox, you can always sign up for that. You can also pick and choose, right? Do I want to get like article updates? Tell me when there's new articles at Mises.org. Do I want to just hear about events? You can basically make your email recipient status with us tailor-made to what you want. Just go to Mises.org and click on subscribe. That's MISES.org. And then up at the top, click on subscribe. So
Ryan's looking to slide into your inbox right there.
So let's talk about Trump's idea this week for the 50-year mortgage. This is a new idea that came down, and both Connor and I wrote columns on this because we were struck by the shortcomings of the idea. So, Connor, can you just introduce us to just basically what were the events that led us to this new announcement about a 50-year mortgage and where it's coming from?
Yeah, so it started as a lot of things do in the Trump administration with a random social media post from the president. There was reporting, I believe, from Politico that said the idea actually came from Bill Pulte, somebody we've mentioned a few times on the show before.
My buddy.
That's right. Apparently, there was some kind of event or something on, I think it was Saturday night, and Pulte just showed up to this event with a poster board, and on the poster board was this graphic of Trump and FDR, and on the top it said something like "Great American Presidents," and then above FDR was the text said 30-year mortgages, and over Trump's head it said 50-year mortgages. And about 10 minutes later, Trump posted that exact graphic and caused what was basically a firestorm on the right-wing social media, you could say. That's how I saw it. I was actually kind of struck by how little attention it seemed to get from the more establishment press. It took a while for the Wall Street Journal editorial board to comment on this, but a lot of MAGA people notably were, let's just say, not happy about it after there's a lot of angles as to why. First of all, FDR being a great president, that's something I think all of us would disagree with there. But then just the whole idea that this is the path forward when it comes to addressing the housing crisis and the housing affordability crisis. It's just crazy, as we'll get into. But I think a lot of people were picking up on the fact that this happened less than a week after the elections, which we talked about last week. And the big takeaway from a lot of people, ourselves included, was that the affordability crisis was kind of the thing that the winning campaigns really committed to, speaking in favor of addressing. And so We were wondering if the Trump administration was going to see that and start acting accordingly. And housing affordability, especially with younger Americans, is like a major issue, especially on the right. So it's no surprise that they have an interest in going about this. But as we can get into, I don't know if 50-year mortgages are the way to do that.
Well, I was impressed by how much pushback he got against it in social media, which demonstrates that I guess people are paying attention when it comes to the mortgage issue. Right now, a lot of people, they have mortgages and they're paying attention to what they're paying on them. And it seemed to be something that people knew a lot about, and in a good way. And so people kind of recognized instinctively that it wasn't a great idea. And in spite of what Trump was saying, because shortly after he offered this idea, now, first of all, let's not just like overlook that whole comparing himself to FDR thing. Let's make sure and drive that home. This man is comparing himself to FDR and thinks and is appealing to conservatives with this. That's bizarre. Though it looks like you have something to add.
He's appealing to greatness. No. The thing is that FDR didn't even create the 30-year mortgage. Right, like the 30-year mortgage came like. I mean, I get that he created some of the infrastructure, whatever.
I mean, the GSEs.
Yeah. So like, I mean, I get that there are plants that there are seeds planted. I had to check that. I was like, wait. But yeah, the 30-year mortgage actually came after FDR. Neither here nor there. Just one little.
I mean, yeah, you could right. I mean, because of Fannie and Freddie, as were New Deal things and all of that.
He tilled the soil, but technically, just
It's just remarkable that this is the place that he has decided to make himself as the model. Hey guys, I'm just like FDR. I'm creating my own New Deal. And conservatives are falling all over themselves to praise him on. Now, of course, there are fewer and fewer Trump supporters every day because of these antics. But the real diehard ones, they just seem to think, oh, it's great. It'll be like FDR. It's awesome. Yay, freedom. One of the most freedom-hating presidents in American history. But that's what we're praising now. And as I noted in my article, FDR was the one who gave us the whole concept of too big to fail now. He created this corporate-centered economy where the government ends up bailing everybody out. Now, it took decades for a lot of that to come to fruition, but all the seeds were sown by FDR. And the fact we have all of these administrative agencies, we have all these quasi, quote-unquote, private organizations that ended up being owned by the federal government, like Fannie and Freddie. This was all FDR's work. So if you love the banker system, if you love the financialization of the economy, if you love too big to fail, if you love bailouts for billionaires, FDR's your guy, and I guess Donald Trump is your guy too.
Well, I do think that's why some of that pushback is there. I do think there's a deeper skepticism of financial markets, of that aspect of it, right? A lot of focus on, we're creating a whole new generation that is going to never be able to pay off these levels of debt there. And so I do think that is kind of, this was a bad week for Trump beyond this, right? I mean, you had him talking about, we'll continue to bring in hundreds of thousands of Chinese students for colleges. We're doubling down on H-1B visas. We don't have talented enough people to fill these jobs, right? So like this was a number of things that were getting like his biggest supporters a little freaked out here. But it is good to see the immediate pushback on this. I'm not particularly surprised. Again, like this is hitting the one of the big rails of politics, right? And that's one of the biggest aftershocks of the off-year elections last year is how quickly the entire conversations focus on these affordability issues. It has now moved away from the immigration front, though obviously that's still a major thing, but it's directly to these. And I think that's one of the reasons why you had Pulte pull out this wild card and ends up in a Truth Social post is because they're just trying to figure out how to stem the bleeding right now. And what's funny is that, and this just goes to how inept, how incompetent DC is. Fast forward a little bit to 13 years ago. The one thing that every Republican agreed upon is that Fannie and Freddie have to go. Like that was the one consensus item after 2008, right? I remember sitting in staff meetings with the Financial Services Committee. Everything was, how do we get away from these public-private Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac monstrosities that created this? And here we are, 2025, and we're going to make them bigger and better than ever. And like that's how quickly like the inability to do any sort of reform is itself part of a meta narrative of this particular proposal. I don't think this surprises any of us, but it is worth recognizing that, again, like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, this entire aspect of the housing market was the universally agreed upon principle back in 2010, 2011, 2012, and it's completely out the window right now.
Well, and let's tie these two issues together, right? Is if you are going to expand the 30-year to a 50-year mortgage, this is going to require plenty of intervention and ongoing support from Fannie and Freddie. The way that 30-year mortgages work, it's not a free market creature. Now, it could work. Of course, banks could offer 30-year mortgages if they want. There wouldn't be nearly as much liquidity to do that as there is presently, and interest rates would probably be significantly higher for such a long-term risk. And so how do we have this 30-year fixed thing, right? Because you can imagine how high the risk is when the mortgage payment is fixed, right? It's one thing. You could easily have 30-year mortgages with variable interest rates, right? Because that could adjust over time and match new realities of interest rates, because interest rates can swing wildly over a 30-year time period. But when you're fixing it in, you need some sort of backstop from the federal government. And that's why you didn't have a whole lot of 30-year mortgages appear before the creation of Fannie and Freddie. So what you've got are these organizations, these corporate, what prior to 2009 were fully private, government guaranteed. Rich guys make money on rich guys buy up the stock of Fannie and Freddie, make money on it. They were sort of private, but everybody knew that they were going to get bailed out if there was ever a serious crisis. So they were, it's like the very definition of like corporate monopoly backed by government.
And one of my favorite anecdotes, this is not particularly relevant, but I find it amusing, so hopefully our audiences will as well, is that when they were bailing out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac back in the day, you know who was like one of the largest international holders of Fannie and Freddie debt?
No.
It was Russia, while they were having their conflict with Georgia at the time. So like we were condemning, we were freaking out about Putin and invading Georgia and all that sort of stuff, while we were bailing out their investments in Fannie Mae and Freddie at the same time. Again, this isn't surprising, but I just find it interesting as an entertaining anecdote of how wonderful our federal government operates.
I imagine there's many such cases.
Many such cases.
Right. And so Fannie and Freddie, they exist to purchase mortgage securities on the secondary market. And so this keeps liquidity moving into the mortgage market. And then on top of that, you've got stuff like FHA, which just directly insures a lot of these mortgages. And so that's why you ended up with this big 30-year fixed market. It is not like just something that arose on its own. It depends on implied government bailouts and easy money to keep interest rates low. And it's all about federal intervention. And so, of course, a lot of people on the left argue, well, this is evidence that we need federal intervention to have high home ownership rates. The reality, of course, it was already very much moving in the direction of higher home ownership rates after World War II. It wasn't. It would have continued to rise, and you wouldn't have had the bailout, too big to fail culture that we have now. And of course, people would have invested in other things. And this was a point that has been made many times about the U.S. mortgage system, is that we're the only ones that really do that. There are plenty of other countries that have home ownership rates of similar levels that don't have this huge, intricate web of federal guarantees and federal intervention to push up home ownership. There's a certain obsession in America with getting the home ownership rate high, and it's now basically been taken over by the federal government in terms of I believe the last time I checked, the vast majority of home loans are in some way enmeshed in federal government programs, whether it's FHA, whether it's those get funneled into mortgage-backed securities that are then owned by either the Fed, they're bought by Fannie Freddie. I mean, the whole thing is highly federalized, and other countries just simply don't have to do that. And they've got plenty of home ownership too. So if you're going to switch to 50-year mortgages, you can only imagine then what the risk levels are. This just magnifies the same stuff that you had to address with more federal intervention for the 30-year mortgage. You can expect even more bailouts. And the big reason that this calls for even more bailouts, even more federal intervention, is the fact that when you start to get to 50-year mortgages, home ownership is a matter of ownership in name only for most people when you think about it, right? Because even now, people talk about home ownership, and then I own my home, and then when you look at the numbers, they have like basically no equity in the property. All they're doing is making monthly payments to a bank and then saying they own the home. Now, of course, if you stayed in the same location for a while, you actually have paid a significant amount of the principal. Yeah, you own a significant stake in that property, and you could probably call yourself the homeowner. But I looked at the numbers, right? I was just using the common, right? Anybody can do this. You just use calculator.net's loan amortization calculator. Like everybody uses this. And if you run the numbers through that, you could start to see the big differences, right, between a 30-year and a 50-year. First of all, we should be clear that if you get a 50-year, you're only saving about $350 a month compared to what you're paying for the 30-year. Now, that might seem significant for a lot of people, but here's the flip side, is even though you're not saving that much, it's really hard to justify when you look at how much equity you're gaining with the 50-year. So you're paying a little bit less with the 50-year, but you are getting almost no equity in the first, 20 years even of making payments on that. So after the first 5 years, you have paid about less than $10,000 of the principal down. Meaning that if your neighborhood, your part of the country has either a stagnant home market or a declining home market, and of course, to lose $10,000 on an asking price during a recession or just generally a stagnant home market, that's nothing. That happens all the time. So if you've got a 50-year mortgage because you're paying so little in principal, you are far more likely to end up underwater after 5 years, even 10 years, if the asking price has to go down even a little bit. So if you end up unemployed, you need to move for a job or whatever reason, and you need to sell that house, you're probably going to lose money on it. And then if there's a case of a real recession and you can't find another job and you really got to sell it, but nobody wants to buy it at the price you need to sell it at in order to avoid losing money, well, now you're just going to end up foreclosing. So it has a 50-year mortgage has a whole lot in common with what we saw back during the old housing bubble, which was pick your payment loans and interest-only loans. We saw these a lot back in those days. Sometimes these were originating with what we called the ninja loans, right? The no income, no job applications for mortgages, or you just said what your income was and they believed it, and then you could just pick your payment. So we had a lot of that going on, and then consequently, nobody had any equity in their homes. They mail the keys to the lender, or they just walk away from the house. You are inviting 100% that sort of thing with a 50-year mortgage. And then just a lot of the populist blowback I saw from people saying, right, Trump, this is the last thing we need. They were pointing out that the reality was going to be, right, since on average, most people are moving after 8 years of living in a house, they're not actually accruing any equity. So if they move and then they start another 50-year mortgage, all they're ever really doing is paying rent to the bank without ever acquiring any real equity. So I was surprised at just how many people saw through the ruse and recognized just how bad an idea it was. So I guess it's already an unpopular idea. It's only been a few days, and he's already being trashed by a lot of his own, what are now former followers in many cases.
Well, I think what they
best to take another swing at Pulte. That's my
yeah.
I'm curious. Okay, go on.
The fighting. I think they're pivoting now. It looks like Pulte's trying to say it's portable mortgages now, I think is what they're going to try to switch to, which I think is more, that seems more reasonable to me, mainly because the 50-year mortgage is just so crazy. But at the same time, what you were saying a few minutes ago still stands. If it needs government backing to exist, this is not actually a valuable financial product at the end of the day. So I'm still skeptical about all that. And I guess what I tried to write about in my article, my kind of angle on this was that this isn't really addressing the actual housing affordability crisis. That, yes, like the whole financial system has blown up and we have this huge bubble, all this financialization. It's a complete mess. But at the end of the day, like the thing that often goes unsaid is that we have an artificial housing shortage in this country. And what's kind of difficult about that and making that like a national political issue is a lot of that is happening on the local level with municipalities as well. I talked a bit about zoning laws that which libertarians are always chirping about. But like that's a major factor here. But then environmental regulations, any kind of regulation on construction, like NIMBYism, you have all of these things that are creating an artificial shortage. And as long as that artificial shortage is there, like there always will be a housing affordability crisis to some degree. And I guess what annoys me about this whole 50-year mortgage thing is they just completely ignore all that. They're going to leave all that in place, go kind of mess around on the financial side of it. And so it's like, it's not just that it's a bad idea, but it's like your attention is in the exact wrong place. And I guess like, yes, like it is kind of difficult to, I think it is difficult to get like a national movement going about what is at the end of the day mostly a local issue. But at the same time, like Trump is the leader of the Republican Party now. Republicans are going all the way down to the local level. If he started talking about this, like, or, his team, the people around him, if they really started pushing this, then like we could actually potentially see some meaningful reform on that front. Also, just to quickly point it out, if it, like I kind of gloss over it. It was a short article, but if anybody's interested in like this actual issue, like why housing is why housing is actually expensive, Ryan did I think 3 great interviews with Chris Calton earlier this year on Radio Rothbard. I think the first one was focusing on homelessness, which is obviously related to all this, but then 2 other ones getting specifically into that, and he cites a lot of books. I think that this needs to be a major issue for any kind of movement that wants like meaningful improvements in this country. But we have to actually understand the real cause of the problem, and just like firing off posts late at night about these speculative financial products, or it's not only is it stupid, it's missing this huge opportunity.
Well, it's even worse than that, because what you want having is increased demand for housing without new supply. And so you're going to end up having an increase of the underlying cost of the house.
Yeah.
And so we're actually going to make houses even more affordable, even better than that. And don't tell me if this doesn't sound like a deja vu all over again. But the same week, our good friend Bill Pulte, I want to blame him for this. I think this comes from him. But they're talking about getting rid of scrapping minimum credit score requirements, which I think are 620 right now, at Fannie Mae, one of the GSEs, part of this as well. So like we're going straight in the 90s here to boost housing demand, focusing on making it easier to finance, but all that will do is further soak up supply, making the prices go up. And so the underlying cost of the housing, on top of all these issues that come with creating new supply, are just going to go up.
Well, it's also just the latest admission that the economy is worse than they're willing to admit. Oh, we have to lower credit scores now in order to have people qualifying for loans? Why are your credit scores low? Well, because I'm missing payments. Because my income isn't enough to cover my expenses, and now I'm delinquent on stuff, or I haven't paid my bills lately. That's why you need to start incorporating lower credit scores into home purchases. That's what we were doing in 2004, 2005, 2006. We kept lowering the necessary requirements for purchasing a home. That's how you end up with a housing bubble. So, I mean, I'm sure Pulte probably portrays it as like some sign of economic strength or something, but of course it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, looking at this, I just want to, first of all, let me state, guys, I said offline that Trump had also suggested 15-year auto loans. I looked that up. As far as I can tell, it's fake news. This was repeated many times in social media, but I have not been able to track down a reliable source as to it seemed plausible, right? Given what we know.
If he sees the reports, he may run with it. Bill Pulte comes in with the poster board.
Well, yeah, I could see Pulte pushing that, but that's not necessarily something that has actually happened yet. But I could see it happening. But right, the whole idea here that Pulte's just trying to push is this idea that it's more affordable, and Trump's. I think he was getting blowback even before he did that TV interview shortly after with Laura Ingraham, if I remember correctly. He went up and he did an interview with her, and she says, so what about this 30-year mortgage? And he must have gotten pushback because he just starts saying, oh, it's no big deal. It's not even a big deal. you'll just have lower payments than with a 30-year, which of course, as we just examined a minute ago, is not true because you're paying huge amounts of interest. And so I guess suppose on a monthly basis, you have lower payments slightly by a few $100. But of course, the amount you pay over time is vastly huger. And so he's just kind of waving all that off and saying, it's barely a change. It's barely any big deal. And then he kind of like stumbled and said, oh, so people have 40-year mortgages now and then they'll have 50. And she pointed out, well, actually, it's 30-year mortgages. He's like, well, some people have 40, which is true, but none of them are federally insured and they're very rare. So I don't even think he knows what's going on in the mortgage market, which, I mean, that's kind of, I would say it describes a lot of the Trump administration in current days is I don't think he knows what's going on with stuff. One thing he doesn't know is what the unemployment rate is, for example. He doesn't know what the CPI inflation rate is, for example, because all those research activities have been halted. And of course, we criticize government money and all that, or government research and all these numbers that come out. But when you're the federal government and you're insisting you should be making policy based on these numbers, maybe we should have something to work with in terms of what's actually going on with employment. And I think what we'll probably find is that employment is really quite bad in the last couple of months. And that seems to be what all the private stuff coming out is pointing to. And we talked about this a little bit in previous weeks, was once you start looking at the private sector reporting on jobs, it's very negative, or it's just very, very small in historical terms. So looking at that, and then also some private firms have tried to report on what they would estimate the CPI is probably going to be. And the one report I saw said, oh, well, it's ticked up slightly to 3.1%. So meanwhile, we got Trump out there saying, inflation's over, it's solved. And why isn't Jerome Powell, who he blamed for having to, during his interview with Ingram, he's like, we have to have 50-year mortgages because we have a terrible guy at the Fed who is raising interest rates. Having 50-year mortgages doesn't solve the interest rate issue at all. And as Tho just pointed out, it doesn't make the underlying price more affordable either. It just creates, without addressing the supply issue, just creates more demand for the same houses. And so you're not going to see home ownership rates increase. This is something in my article that I wrote on this topic, by the way, I linked to a old Heritage Foundation article, it's from like 7 or 8 years ago. But nothing's changed since then in terms of its analysis, is that in spite of all of these decades of more and more liberalizing the requirements for purchasing a house, homeownership rate actually hasn't changed in decades. All they do is increase the risk constantly in terms of too big to fail, in terms of promised bailouts, and the homeownership rate's gone nowhere. All that's happened is that the people who actually have managed to get into the market just keep getting older, and no young people can buy homes. That's where the real change is in the marketplace. So 50-year mortgage would do nothing. It would not actually, even if you did manage to get younger people into home ownership, it would, again, be home ownership in name only. They wouldn't have any equity because they would only be able to slide in, barely getting the 50-year mortgage rate with what, like a 5% down payment maybe? And then they've got no equity when they finally need to sell. And young people sell their homes more often. They don't live as long in one place. So they're going to just be bouncing from one 50-year mortgage to another. Welcome to paying rent. I mean, that's basically what it is. So that's Trump's big idea for the week, and all based on what? While claiming that inflation's going down, claiming that employment's great. He has no idea. Doesn't know how mortgage works, doesn't know what employment situation is. All of this, it just seems to be making up stuff that he thinks maybe could get some people excited in the short term. And it doesn't look great.
I think what other ideas are out there? Like, that's the problem right now, is that, for all the energy and all the institutions have been built and all that sort of stuff, right, around the current manifestation of MAGA conservatism, so much of the focus was on immigration, so much of the focus was on taking back universities, so much of it was on various cultural related issues, so much of it was this and this. But when it comes to the economy, the big idea, the big new idea was tariffs, right? And then a little bit of Doge, and the Doge didn't go anywhere, right? But there hasn't been any sort of serious, robust, new thinking, right, of how to actually deal with kitchen table affordability issues. And I mean, we see this play out particularly right now with, again, as we mentioned several episodes now, is that, the entire government shutdown, which we didn't even fail to recognize that, hey, at least the government's open again, right? Aha. But the catalyst for that, right, is, oh yeah, we've got this whole Obamacare thing that we've been propping up with duct tape, bubble gum, and a whole lot of money. It's not working. How do we fix it? Oh well, go away. They're brainstorming some ideas now. Just wait. It's like we've been sitting around for. This was back in 2016. We ran on a replacement Obamacare. They had no ideas, right? We had one decent idea that got killed. I've already ranted about that. But there's no solutions. When it comes to economic issues, there is not some sort of ready-made mill of new, bold policy plans. And so the Republican Party right now, Trump and et cetera, right? Like, it's not as if there is some sort of wonkish, Senate movement right now for something different that just hasn't caught Trump's eye. I think that's one of the reasons why the 50-year plan was appealing. Is Pulte? He was like, I got to fix for this. We're just gonna go bigger on here. What else you got? And that's the current state of Republican politics at the national level right now. And again, this is gonna play out. This is gonna be a never-ending cycle right now because affordability, number one political issue right now, no solution because you can't cut spending. Heaven forbid, can't do that. So. What else you got? We just passed the budget that brings that solidifies Biden era spending, so we can't touch that thing. What else we got?
Spend more money.
That's what Tom Woods opened up Mises U this year, where they talk about that, about how like a lot of people in these sort of new right circles have just dismissed economics, and this is the consequence of that. There's no coherent MAGA economic vision, and so they don't really have anywhere to go with it. And then it puts Trump in this difficult position. Like that was another big part of that Ingram interview was that he called it the greatest economy that we've ever had. He basically has had to completely adopt Biden's terribly failed strategy of just denying people's economic pain. And we just saw how terribly that worked out for the previous administration. And Trump's just doing the same thing, but he kind of has to because, there's just no actual interest in making meaningful changes. It's just, like you said, continuing Biden's budget. I think Dave Smith put out a tweet that it's essentially like a second Biden term, but with a closed border. And I'm thinking about, I think I might write an article about this next week, but I feel like in a lot of ways, Trump is the right's Obama in that Obama back in 2008, like the amount of excitement that I was in middle school, I was not paying any attention to this stuff, but looking back at it, it's clear that, coming out of like the Occupy Wall Street protests, like the amount of excitement and optimism that a lot of, young college students and young progressives had when Obama won, like that was palpable. And I think kind of similar to where MAGA was a year ago when Trump won again. But then, and like what did Obama run on? He basically ran on like cracking down on corporations, especially the big banks, and ending George W. Bush's wars. And he did neither of those things. He, ushered in like a historic period of easy money for Wall Street. And then, he switched like foreign policy wise from these overt nation building exercises to more like covert regime change in Syria and Libya. But like he was extremely hawkish. And I think like there's parallels there to where we are with Trump, where like whether he was like never genuinely trying to make changes or he has been co-opted, it kind of makes no difference. He's in a similar position right now. And I think if you look back at the left and Obama, the major mistake that they made is they just rallied around him anyway, and they refused to condemn him. And then coming out of his presidency with like when Sanders went up against Clinton, Sanders kind of embodying that old Occupy Wall Street left, like he didn't have anything really to run on because he refused to trash the previous administration. And then, of course, he rolled over and submitted when the establishment Democrats completely cheated him. And I think that from my perspective, the big peril for Trump supporters right now is that they continue to fall in line and they don't criticize Trump, because if they don't criticize Trump, then the only sort of pressure he's going to be getting is from the people that want him to compromise. I think that's sort of why we're here. It is nice, as you said, Ryan, like he has been getting some pushback, at least on the mortgage thing. He's been getting some pushback on the Epstein stuff. So like it exists there. It seems like MAGA's in a better position than the Obama supporters were. But I think this is sort of the big dynamic going forward in terms of is Trump actually going to make any changes, or is he just going to be another Obama?
Well, and to your point, Trump had some nasty words this week for Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? I can't think of anybody in Congress who better embodies like the MAGA zeitgeist, right? And Marjorie Taylor Greene, and he attacked her like, oh, you know, she's coddling with the left and she's got her own act going on, and for what? Because Marjorie Taylor Greene's calling out Republican leadership not having any of these plans. Yeah, that I'm worried about my district in North Georgia, like with all the consequences of that sort of stuff. Things are not getting cheaper. This is a major problem. We ran to fix this. We've got no idea of what we're doing. Speaker Johnson's a joke, right? And I think that's where most MAGA folks are right now. Anna Paulina Luna, Lauren Boebert, right? They joined with Thomas Massie to discharge the Epstein files, right? Another one of those things. That's one of those kind of key zeitgeist issues for MAGA, right? And so like it's the members of Congress that are the most authentic MAGA, if you will, you use whatever term you want, that are becoming right now, very interestingly, the most disruptive aspects of the Republican coalition, and doing things that Speaker Johnson and the Trump administration are, for whatever reason, not wanting to do. And I think that aspect of it, I think that's a very fascinating point that you're making there, Connor. And I think that's one of the interesting components is that, again, MAGA, both in terms of what we're seeing on public discourse and whatever, but also even within kind of that core faction is and this is perhaps one of the silver linings, one of our common themes is that the Trumpers are better than Trump. I think that we're even kind of seeing that even within the snake den of the U.S. Congress right now.
Well, I mean, is it just me though? Well, we're less than a year into this administration. It feels more like year 3 to me than the very, very beginning, right? Year 3, after you've lost the midterms, everyone in the administration is demoralized, starts looking for other jobs. You're out of ideas, right? This is true at the governor level as well. Right. I won my second term. We're more than halfway through. It's time to just coast to the end. That's how the Trump administration feels to me already, like 10 months in. And that seems to me like bad thing that like that there's nothing more to expect. We've got Trump out there actively lobbying against the Epstein files thing, actively trying to cover that up. And we got him out there, like you said, though, talking about this is the greatest economy in the history of the universe. Besson was on, the talk shows last week saying we're in a golden age. And then Trump, when repeated, that was clearly a talking point for the administration, goes up and makes a speech and says we're in the golden age. America's never been stronger. No normal person under the age of 60 thinks we're in the middle of a golden age. The economic situation is very unfortunate for a lot of people. People are falling behind in their payments. Delinquency rates are high. And we've got to listen to this guy tell us how amazing and great everything is. And if you disagree, just stop complaining. That's their strategy. I can't imagine where they go from here in terms of the midterm election. But I guess it's just back to your question, though. What other ideas have they got? Doesn't seem to be anything.
Well, and even if they had some, like their one big thing, right? This is why it was the big beautiful bill, right? Was and that was the entire from a legislative point of view, that was the entire gamble. We're going to attach everything we can in this. This is going to be the magic elixir. We have to pass it by July 4th so that the ramifications are felt in time for the midterms next year. We're going to manage around the edges when it comes to congressional maps and things like that, right? And maybe there are some aspects of that might play out and make a meaningful difference to certain groups of people that are hurting right now. For example, the no tax on tips. That's obviously going to play a role for service industry workers, which is a major thing, and kudos for that. But I owning from the get-go the economy and praising it so early on, like if the entire narrative had been from the get-go, look how much Biden had screwed this up. We got a big job of hoe. He should have leaned into low expectations early because it was always predictable that the economy that he inherited, like this was the first thing we said after Trump was elected, right? The economy that Trump inherited in 2025 is much worse than the economy inherited in 2027 or 2017. And that economy wasn't great, but it was much better than you got this time around. There's so many foundational problems here. And instead of leaning into that narrative and blaming the last 4 years, which would have been political theater in its own right, but whatever, that would have been another narrative selling point. You go straight to this is great, continuing to fail to see the indications here. And what else do you have? You're not going to get a 60 vote legislative agenda change if you were to find a magic bullet that's going to fix healthcare, right? You can't even do that. How much executive power? How much can the agencies do at this point? It's The only thing that they've got going for them is, do you trust the other side?
Right.
Right. That the Democrats are that's one of the most fascinating aspects of just the political, horse racing sort of a component to it, is that even as Trump's numbers go down, the Democrat numbers don't get any better. Midterms were all driven by enthusiasm and whatever, right? You can't really take those elections as some sort of national referendum at this point. But the Democrats are not particularly benefiting because they don't trust them either. So, I mean, again, it's nice that people are kind of seeing the system for the way that, very along the lines of the way that we kind of view it. But it's going to make for a very interesting, another calendar year.
I almost wonder if the Democrats winning in some of these elections last week might maybe not a benefit for Trump, but it may have been worse if the Democrats did poorly, because now it's going to be clear that they don't have answers either. Like when Zohan Mamdani comes in, he's not going to fix New York. The economy is not going to get more affordable for the average New Yorkers. I think, and it's like Trump could use that and point to it and be like, look, they don't have anything either. Of course, he'd be coming from a stronger position if he had coherent things to push himself. I think a major strategic mistake would be if he started trying to go after Mamdani and doing whatever he can to meddle and make Mamdani fail, because then he's just handing the Democrats an excuse. Oh, it wasn't Mamdani's insane economic policies. It was the fact that Trump came in and meddled that explains the bad results.
Well, and we kind of touched on it in a recent episode, but I think the biggest tell of, for all this, and this is the thing, right? It's easy to kind of get worked up. And again, we already seen the backtrack a little bit on the 50-year thing. It is admittedly easy to get wrapped up in some of the ideas that are thrown out there, the way Trump says things, and he'll say something here and then it never happens, right? For both good and bad, right? It happens all the time. Well, the biggest tell is, how does the administration respond to the inevitable Supreme Court ruling on tariffs? If the Supreme Court does what is being projected as them doing, right, that they are going to strike down major parts of the tariff platform, with a few little exceptions here and there, do they double down, or do they complain about it and do nothing? And I think that, I guess, if you're looking at what's the easiest way to change some of this stuff, it's just getting rid of that burden. Mm-hmm. And so I think the biggest tell on what the administration actually sees is how much do they complain versus how much do they do following the aftermath of that. And I think that's going to be a very interesting experiment to watch play out.
Yeah, I think priorities mean a lot with an administration, right? There's only so many hours in the day. The executive himself can only spend so much time doing things, can only spend so much time cajoling others to follow his lead and to help him out. And so you need to pick just really 2 or 3 things that your administration is going to really, really focus on. And from what I've seen over the years, the most successful executives tend to be those people who really focus on a few things. And Trump, none of the priorities are things that actually help ordinary people at this point. You're not seeing him spending any time on, say, deregulation anymore. Very little going on there. There was a little tiny bit that went on with Doge, and that was great. That was fine. That's all over now, it seems. He's not talking about it, not talking about taxes, right, aside from just a little bit about taxes on tips and things like that. Not talking about deregulating, not talking about really anything more to lessen the power of administrative agencies, which I loved all that talk during Doge. I loved when Doge was doing a thing. Even I knew Doge wasn't going to really cut $1 trillion, but I thought maybe they could really help chip away at a lot of the power of these administrative agencies. Great, USAID is gone. But I mean, is that going to help you when you're unemployed? Not particularly. It'll help the Republicans win some races in the future, and maybe that would be a good thing compared to the even more commie Democrats. Fine, great. But when you've got a president out there who's all he's really talking about is we need to import more Chinese workers because American workers are too stupid to do the jobs necessary. Oh, also, colleges and universities will go out of business if I don't import more foreigners for them. Now, look, I am by no means a hardliner about immigration in terms of closing the borders. I think a porous border is a good thing, right? If you have family members or associates, actual employees that the private sector wants to deal with, I prefer not a highly interventionist regime being involved in that stuff. But lecturing people about how it's a good thing to import more foreigners explicitly to fill your job. That's basically what Trump is saying now because Americans can't handle it. That doesn't strike me as great politics. It's like he's just throwing out stuff. I mean, I can't believe he said that.
Also, to keep open these progressive socialist like ideological factories that are the university system. Like,
right now, it's our job. Now it's federal government's job to keep
up?
Colleges in business. What a weird,
the indoctrination centers. What's that hard to say? Indoctrination. Goodness gracious, English.
Yeah, so that's what he's saying now. Oh, I need to import these people as basically corporate welfare for colleges. Okay, I don't remember voting for that as a Trump voter, I think many people might say. And the United States probably has way too many colleges and universities anyway. So, and you know how we'll know is how many are still in business after demand starts to go down. The money will flow to the better ones and the loser ones will disappear. Fine. Great. I don't see why keeping them open is a service to America, but that's what Trump is telling us now. He's telling us that, no Epstein files for you, but yeah, more immigrants to take your jobs because you're stupid and lazy. And also we need to make sure that we give more funding to the communist political science professors at, Podunk Central Illinois College or whatever. And so that's where this administration is right now. The EPA ruining your life, can't bother to be mentioning it. Other administrative agencies destroying you. I got other priorities. I'm trying to raise tariffs here, folks. So it's bizarre to me that there's even much left in terms of support for this administration. Anything outside of just, gee, thank goodness it's not Kamala. That's it. That's all you got.
Which I think does matter. Like that's one of my pushbacks to Dave Smith things. Like different people are being prosecuted than they would have been if Kamala is. Like I'll take Comey being prosecuted a lot more than Catholic homeschoolers. So like that it's just unfortunate, but that's kind of the situation we're in. It's like who has the guns trained at them, and that's kind of the biggest deciding factor on the clown show of everything else going on right now. The one person who I think might be having a good week though is our good friend Steve Marin. Because do you think the chances of the Fed dropping rates for all the serious talk that we talked about way back 3 weeks ago? I have a feeling that we're probably going to get a rate cut in December, just as Marin wanted. So he's probably the one guy that's probably enjoying this week.
Well, now that we have so little data, I don't know what the Fed is thinking now. I actually looked up, right? Has Powell said anything on this lately? Has the FOMC said anything? They've been really quite silent for the last couple of weeks, maybe just because, I don't know, they don't have jobs data to work with. You'll remember at the last meeting, at the last FOMC meeting, Powell made a big deal about how, don't assume we're going to lower rates next time. But if the job situation continues to worsen, what are they going to do? I don't know. And so, yeah, I mean, I'll be very interested to see. I guess we're not going to see job data until, early December? And so we'll just be kind of guessing based on what the Feds say until then. So I guess we'll know more then. Also, I don't know if this is affected by the shutdown, but I've been looking for the latest Treasury report as well, because I don't know how big the deficit was for November in terms of tax revenue. If tax revenue is going down, that's going to be a very interesting thing to look at. If once tax revenue goes down, you're in a terrible economic situation. So there isn't any recent data that I've seen. Maybe they'll put that out with the shutdown over. So we may know more soon.
Well, it is interesting on that. Two points that came to mind there. Bessent was once again bragging about the tariff revenue earlier this week, and in doing so, he even acknowledged he was trying to make the argument that increased tariff revenue is going to be a positive impact on inflation, because the deficit is a major component of inflation in the economy, which is good to see acknowledged. But then you but our spending hasn't gone down at all. And so if you recognize that government spending fuels inflation, maybe the solution isn't just increased tariff revenue. Maybe it's actually trying to cut that. Neither here nor there. But of course, you also had the other big idea, which was $20,000 Trump checks out of tariff revenue, but only to people making under $100,000, which given the modern economy, it's not what it used to be. And so you just expect nowhere else worse to be than that that group right there, like the 105,000, is like, and just enough to be significantly impacted by the inflationary consequences of what's going on right now, but not enough to get your stimmy. So, like, again, this is great spot for the middle class.
Well, it's interesting churn that's going there because you need the $2,000 just to cover the inflation that came from the previous stimulus check. So now you got a new stimulus check. You better save it because you're going to need it to cover the inflation like 18 months from now. So we'll see how that goes. All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up for this episode of Power and Market Podcast. Thank you, everyone, for joining me out there. We'll be back next time with more, so we'll see you then.